They said, we'll pay you $1,000, and it'll only take about 10 minutes. So I was 26 years old at the time. I jumped on it,
And I say, there's no question. They say, well, is there a little bit of question? Is there a question whether you could have been fooled? I said, no way. No way.
Do you plan to tell the truth on this test about whether you were the Bigfoot shown in the 1967 Patterson film?
Yes.
Among hundreds of Bigfoot videos filled with legends, only one has divided both scientists and researchers for decades, the Patterson-Gimlin film. In our previous video, we presented 9 different pieces of evidence showing why this footage is still considered the strongest proof of Bigfoot in history. That video received far more attention than we expected, and as promised, today we're revealing the 10th and most controversial piece of evidence. In this episode, we'll examine step by step why Bob Heironimus could not have been Patty, and why the creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film is almost impossible to explain as a costume. Was it really a man in a suit, or a brief glimpse of a species long thought to be extinct? If you're ready, let's take a step closer to the final question that has remained unanswered for decades. Now hit the like button, grab your coffee, and sit back. Let's take a look together at the fine line between reality and legend. Bob Heironimus came forward in the early 2000s and claimed that he was actually the person seen as Patty in the Patterson-Gimlin film. According to him, Roger Patterson had asked him to wear a costume and walk in front of the camera. Heironimus alleged that the costume was not his, but that Roger had obtained it through the Philip Morris costume company as a gorilla suit. He claimed he had remained silent for years, but wanted to reveal the truth once he grew older. This claim caused a stir in the Bigfoot community, but many experts and researchers were not convinced. Why? Costume technology and the gorilla suits available on the market in 1967 simply did not feature the detailed muscles, breasts, and movement seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film. In interviews, Heironimus stated that Patterson had been in serious financial trouble at the time. He claimed Patterson often borrowed from friends and acquaintances and sometimes could not even pay back small amounts. Heironimus said, "He promised to pay me $1,000 for wearing the costume in the film, but he never paid me." However, there was no documentation from Patterson or anyone around him confirming such a promise.
Bob, you're here today with a very unusual claim that you are actually Bigfoot.
That's right.
I don't think there are many people who have not seen that shadowy picture of this beast going through the woods, looking back over his shoulder. And you're telling me that wasn't Sasquatch, that wasn't Bigfoot, that was you in a costume.
That was me in a costume in 1967 in the Roger Patterson Bigfoot film, yes.
First of all, no one would offer an ordinary man $1,000 just to wear a costume. In 1967, this was worth tens of thousands of today's dollars, a very large sum. Let's say such an agreement was truly made. In that case, Patterson's greatest fear would have been exposure, and to avoid that risk, he would have surely paid the debt. Secondly, if you were promised such a payment but never received it, you would not wait 40 years to reveal it. Human nature dictates that you would either come forward immediately to claim your due, or at least share the secret within a few years. Remaining silent for 40 years and only making such a confession in old age severely undermines the credibility of the claim. If Bob Heironimus really wore that costume, why has no one ever seen it? Normally, the strongest evidence for such a revelation would be to show where the costume was kept. Even decades later, at least remnants, fragments, or purchase records could have surfaced, but no such evidence was ever presented. Moreover, Heironimus claimed the costume was obtained from the Philip Morris costume company, yet this claim was never verified either. There are no records of Morris providing such a suit at the time, nor did their designs include the muscle and facial movement features seen in the film. The suits made by Morris were simply basic monkey outfits. They lacked the muscle movement, chest detail, and proportions evident in the PG film. Even today, Hollywood's most professional costume designers can make costumes far superior to Philip Morris's simple suits, yet none have managed to recreate the realism of Patty. Modern ape suits are still little more than fur pajamas, lacking the underlying structure needed to give muscles real points of contact and natural motion. By contrast, the figure in the Patterson-Gimlin film appears to possess a living muscular system. In other words, Morris has never, even after all these years, been able to provide a suit that matches what was seen in the film. Philip Morris didn't make this claim in 1967. He began saying it almost 30 years later, in the 1990s, during interviews where he stated, "I made that costume and sent it to Roger Patterson." Yet, he never provided a single piece of evidence to support this story. No receipts, no photos, and no witnesses. But here's the problem. This is the supposed costume, and that's Bob wearing it. Just look at the proportion, the body shape, muscle movement, and especially the chest details don't even come close to what we see in the Patterson-Gimlin film. The arms are far too short, the head is too small, and the fabric moves like cheap carpet. There's absolutely nothing here that resembles Patty. In 1967, Morris ran a small costume shop in the United States, mainly selling low-quality carnival, theater, and gorilla suits. But the creature seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film was far beyond anything like that. The visible muscle motion, chest anatomy, leg proportions, and realistic gait were impossible to achieve with the commercial costumes of the 1960s. Even more telling, Morris's wife and employees never confirmed his story. Philip Morris's "I made the costume" story is nothing more than an unsupported marketing claim that surfaced decades later, and the Bigfoot suit he showed, as you can see in the photo, bears no resemblance whatsoever to Patty. If this truly was the costume used in the 1967 footage, then it only proves one thing. Patty looked far more real than anything skeptics have ever been able to recreate since. Researchers have noted that at least 5 to 6 different people or companies have made similar claims over the years, but all of them either failed to provide evidence or contradicted one another. In short, if this had truly been a costume, by now we would have concrete proof, a location where it was stored, remnants, or credible eyewitness testimony. But there is nothing. And this is one of the weakest points of Heironimus' story. Heironimus said, "I was the man in the film," but he could not describe the filming day, the site, or the conditions in detail. If he had truly been there, he would have been able to provide far more specific information about the terrain. Patty's long strides and the coordination of knee-hip movement absent in Heironimus' walk. Patty's long arms and swinging motion could not be imitated with Heironimus' human-like arm proportion. The visible muscle movement in Patty, especially in the thighs and calves, never appeared in the costume or in Heironimus' body. In other words, Heironimus did try walking in a suit, but he could not replicate Patty's movements as seen in the PG film. Instead of strengthening his claim, this made it even more questionable. We are talking about one of the most watched short films in human history. The Patterson-Gimlin film, much like the Zapruder film, has been examined countless times by being zoomed in and slowed down. In fact, even 8 years before the Zapruder film was made public, Patty's footage had already been scrutinized millions of times. Therefore, the details in this film have been meticulously known to researchers for decades. Expert analyses show that the figure known as Patty was over 7 feet, 2.13 meters, tall, and weighed around 700 pounds, 318 kilograms. Researcher John Green tested this by having 6 feet 6 inches, 198 centimeters, Jim McLaren walk the same area for a comparison shot. It was later determined that McLaren had actually walked about 5 feet, 1.5 meters, closer to the camera than Patty had. This made him appear taller than he was, but even then, he still did not reach Patty's height. On the other hand, Bob Heironimus was never 7 feet tall or 700 pounds. He wasn't even 6 feet, 1.80 meters. In 1967, only about 4,000 people in the entire world were as tall as 7 feet, 2.13 meters, and Bob was not one of them. This shows that Patty's physical traits and Heironimus' body simply did not match. In fact, when Bob's attempt to replicate the walk is compared with Patty in the Bluff Creek film, the size differences and body proportion inconsistencies become obvious. Nothing about their bodies aligns. And if such quality cannot be matched even 40 years later, How could Roger Patterson, who was in debt, and Bob Gimlin, an ordinary cowboy, have created or purchased a costume of that level in 1967? Another important point is this. Bob Heironimus was not the only one to claim he was Patty in the Patterson-Gimlin film. Over the years, other individuals came forward with similar claims. Some said, "I made the suit," while others claimed, "I was the person in the film." But none of these individuals ever produced concrete evidence to support their claims. No actual costume, no receipts, no proof that they were even there on that day. As a result, all these claims remained at the level of rumor. In the end, there are multiple conflicting "I was Patty" claims, but they all contradict one another. If there had truly been just one person in that role, so many different names would not have come forward years later to take ownership of the same story. This shows us that calling the figure in the film a man in a suit rests only on an unproven and constantly changing narrative. Nearly 60 years have passed. Today, we have AI-powered visual effects, million-dollar CGI technology, and the most advanced costume designers in Hollywood. Yet, despite all these advancements, even in 2025, no one has managed to capture footage that matches the realism of the Patterson-Gimlin film. Whether you like it or not, that fact points to only one truth. This film is too special, too unique, and too far ahead of its time to have been an ordinary hoax. And perhaps, for some people, the most terrifying possibility is that the footage might actually be real. Because if Patty was real, something out there in the deep forests might still be watching.